But I would like to welcome to Humanities Watch my colleague, Dr. Phoebe Stein. Phoebe and I met last year through the Virginia Tech Institute for Leadership in Technology program, and we met in Alexandria. And Phoebe has been president of the Federation of State Humanities Councils for the last several years. And prior to that, she was executive director of Maryland Humanities. And she also served on the board of the Federation. And she has a doctorate in English literature from Loyola University. And she has, still serves on the board of the National Humanities Alliance, which many of our listeners will be familiar with, and also on the Advisory Council of Humanities Indicators, that wonderful group Rob Townsend and others are involved with. So thank you, Phoebe, for being here and chatting with us, chatting with me a little bit about your work and your insights and your thoughts on the humanities in general.
Entirely my pleasure. Thanks so much.
So I wanted to start off. Some of our listeners may not be directly familiar with the Federation, and so maybe you could say a few words about what the Federation is, what it does.
Yeah. So the Federation of State Humanities Councils is a 501c3, a nonprofit, private nonprofit. We are the membership organization for the nation's 56 state and jurisdictional humanities councils. So every state and every territory and Washington, D.C. have a humanities council. They are also nonprofit organizations founded through the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our membership organization was created in 1977. So it was not, the councils came into being shortly after both the cultural agencies, National Endowment for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts, were created in the late 60s, early 70s. And then the councils developed over time, as you can imagine. They're over decades. But the membership organization that we know as the Federation started in 1977.
Wonderful. Yes, and I've had the pleasure of attending events of North Carolina Humanities Council here, and it's really quite amazing and impressive the amount of work that your federation supports, all over the country. Sort of a big question is about your life and your interests. And so why did you pursue this path? I mean, you had lots of options in pursuing your graduate studies and after your graduate studies. And so what led you down this path to support the humanities in this way?
Yeah. Well, I knew, well, sort of, I won't bore you, but my origin story, I went to University of Michigan as an undergraduate. And in 1980, I want to get the date right, I'm pretty sure 1986, Toni Morrison gave the Tanner Lectures at the University of Michigan. And my English professor at the time said, go get a ticket to this. And I thought, well, how hard can that be? Well, standing room only, got myself a seat. I have the lectures printed out here in my office. And from the minute that Toni Morrison opened her mouth, I thought, okay, I want to be a part of that. I didn't know what that was. I wasn't smart enough to understand sort of probably every other word that she was saying. It was about really African-American images in American literature. And I just understood that her approach, her close reading, her cultural context, what she was bringing to the work, really so much work in literature brought it to life completely for me. And I just knew I wanted to be a part of that. So I did end up going to graduate school and getting a PhD in American literature, 19th and 20th century American literature, focusing on women's literature primarily. Was in the classroom for 10 years teaching, and then took a summer internship in 1999 at Illinois Humanities at the Illinois Council. And my experience working there was just tremendous. And what I saw was the humanities thriving in public spaces. So libraries, VFW halls, barbershops, public parks, so it was a whole new world for me outside of the classroom to see the humanities thriving, and I was really very much drawn to it.
Well, that's such a compelling story. I think in a number of ways. First of all, it shows us the power of the poet, right? The power of poetry to move us, to inspire us, to find paths that we might not have anticipated. So it's a wonderful story about this deeply learned and creative poet Toni Morrison, and then
Mm.
also about your discovery of what I think Rob Townsend has written about this a little bit, sort of what I might call the hidden humanities, right? I mean, the public humanities are sometimes the hidden humanities. We might not call them, quote unquote humanities, but they're there, they're thriving, they're in these places, they're in these
Mhm.
spaces.
Yeah, they're the least hidden, actually, because
Right.
they're
In
in the
that sense,
public spaces. But
within the
yeah,
public space, but the
yeah.
name is not usually applied, right? We
Mhm.
don't say,
Yes,
oh, those are the humanities.
yes.
So, and that's a great sort of lead to, I think, another question that's been on my mind, which is, tell us a little bit about you're getting into it a little bit with Illinois, but types of programs that the Federation supports. It's an amazing array, but maybe you could give us a
Yeah.
sense of
Yeah.
some
So,
ideas.
right. I mean, I would say that, our mission at the Federation is really to support and advocate for the nation's humanities councils. Um, so that means connecting those councils. It means gathering them. We have a number of annual convenings, our National Humanities Conference, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, which we travel around the country each year, draws lately, last year, almost 900 people, 900 humanists. And again, those are folks who are scholars, but they're practitioners as well, in Humanities Council staff and board members. So our work is really to support and also advocate on Capitol Hill for federal funding for the councils as well that flows through NEH. And these projects are incredibly diverse as the places where they are offered. I have a little cheat sheet here just because the diversity is immense, but in Montana, they are running a program called the Democracy Project, where teens basically get resources to meet community needs, and they're in the community and of the community, and that's how they identify those needs. And that is democracy work in terms of identifying what their neighbors and strangers in their community, maybe strangers to them, need, and what kind of resources they can provide. It's really a civic engagement project. PA Humanities in Pennsylvania, they have a program called Rain Poetry. So they partner with Philadelphia Poets Laureate, with literary specialists, and they've developed a curriculum to teach young people the art of haiku. Those
Hmm.
haikus are then actually transposed onto the sidewalk, where water reveals those haikus to the public walking by. It's also a bilingual program.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Michigan Humanities is working with people identified as women who are veterans. And that program is called Same Mission, Many Stories, and they're using museum objects as sort of a grounding text, if you will, for female veterans to talk to one another about their experiences. So that gives you just a flavor from, East Coast, West, Midwest,
Mhm.
and I certainly could go on and on about the diversity of the
Yeah,
projects.
absolutely. Yeah, so it also speaks to us of the different people, that ages and range of ages, and the
Mhm.
populations
Yes.
that are engaged and are
Yeah.
engaging in the humanities that you support. And I think your work, your federation's work, is so critical. I think many of our listeners feel this way in a time when a lot of public discourse circles around what's referred to through the acronym of STEM, and the latest generation of AI, right? So
Sure.
we're
Sure.
keenly sort of focused in public discourse on, let's called technology and engineering and math, and we
Sure.
all know these are incredibly important subjects.
Yep.
And we sometimes ask ourselves, or people ask themselves, what is the connection or what is the relationship between humanities and STEM? This is something, of course, my website is trying to address.
Mhm.
And in
Mhm.
your experience, then, how do you see this relationship? Maybe you've seen it evolve in a certain way, or you've seen
Mhm.
it, people embrace it through different programs. So,
Certainly, certainly. I would say that the two for me go hand in hand in terms of, we do have kind of a joke about that around here, which is, STEM can help you clone animals, talk about cloning people. The humanities is going to let you know whether that's a good idea or not.
mhm,
So we're taking the idea of ethics and the law and what the human experience of these technological advances are, what the
right.
impact on humanity. Obviously, the base of humanities. So that's really, that's where I think the humanities are always by the side of right alongside of great technological advances. That has always been the case. I think we've been talking about AI. What does that? I mean, I'm no expert, but what are the implications for our humanity? So I think, and these are not conversations that we just should think about having. I think they're fundamental to the work, and it's integral. I will say, excuse me, Humanities Kansas just had a fascinating program with the poet laureate, the U.S. poet laureate Ada Limon. Speaking of poetry, um, she is the U.S. Poet Laureate at the Library of Congress, and she wrote a poem that was dedicated to a NASA mission, the Europa Clipper going up into space. And Ada Limon wrote a poem that was engraved on the side capsule of this object vessel going into space, also signed by people in the community before it went up into space. So I think this is the idea that, we have NASA
Mhm.
participating in poetry and seeing poetry as a way for us to understand the relationship between ourselves and the
Mhm.
universe.
Yes, it's a wonderful metaphor.
It
Having
is, but it's
a,
also literal. Like I
but it's
love
also
that the
literal.
poem is on the
Yes,
side of
yeah,
the vessel. I love
yeah,
that.
yes. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Um, in as you look over all of these wonderful projects, and I'm going to ask you sort of a tricky question. I know it's tricky, but I feel like I have to ask.
Yeah.
People want
Yeah.
to know. Um, are there aspects of the humanities that, again, in recent years have been overlooked? Are there aspects that need to be highlighted? Are there aspects that you need to be foregrounded?
Hmm.
Um, I know it's sort of a tricky question because it's asking you to sort of discriminate among the humanities, but I
Right.
feel like
Well,
it's important.
yeah, I mean, it's sort of that, which is your favorite child thing. But I'm
Right.
gonna actually give it a whole new context, which is for me, the humanities is what happens between ourselves and a text. And that text could be a photograph or a book or a
Mhm, mhm.
movie, or even if you're reading or philosophy or a law that you're looking at and trying to assess. So for me, it's the interaction between yourself and this text, and then also the interaction of different perspectives on that text. So I don't necessarily think that it's one aspect of the humanities, but I do think, I mean, in terms of, I wouldn't say history,
Right.
literature, philosophy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't choose one.
Right.
I wouldn't choose a discipline. I don't think about the humanities in disciplinary ways,
Right.
in the way that maybe higher ed would. I don't know. But I would say that for me, I think that interaction between each other, or if you're quietly reading a book, it's that interaction that to me should be foregrounded. it's that connection. I guess that's what I would
Yeah.
say.
No, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful universalizing aspect that's also very particular. And it speaks to dialogue, which is one of the things
Yeah,
to my heart, right? Is having
yeah.
that conversation, even as you say, a silent conversation with a book, the exchange between your experience and the experience of the characters, the experience of the author, the experience of the poet, the experience
Mhm.
of people who lived in the past before us and the legacy that they left for us. Yeah, I think that that is going back to what you first said about the public humanities being visible, right? So there,
Mhm.
and it's sort
Yeah,
of the dialogue is always there, but maybe we need to sort of highlight that, value
yeah.
that, treasure it, cultivate it. Um, so I really appreciate you
I
talking.
think it's the engagement, sort
Mhm.
of. And I also think it's important to meet people where they are. I mean,
Yes.
there is humanities practice going on in communities that is not um, cultivated necessarily by, there's lots that is being grown and sown by humanities councils, but the best work is when humanities councils can partner in and with community um, and work with them. They're not bringing something to, expose them to. They are interacting and learning from one another.
Yeah.
So I think it's very much reciprocal, and there's always already the humanities in communities that we can engage with. So I think there's an aspect of humility also,
Mhm.
maybe, that
Mhm.
we can foreground.
Yeah, I can appreciate that this idea of listening to what's already there, and this is also an appeal then also to people listening to our conversation, who may be engaged in humanities work and would like to find out whether they can be supported by the
Yeah.
Federation. Work they've already been doing
Hmm.
this and finding it valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can um go to our website, statehumanities.org, and find, your humanities council, the humanities council nearest you. I'm here in the DMV on the East Coast, and that means, Delaware, Pennsylvania, DC, Maryland, Virginia, there's a
Mhm.
lot. But anywhere in the country, and then of course in the territories as well.
Right.
Um, that means Northern Mariana Islands, Guahan, Virgin Islands. There is something near you, and if it's not near enough to drive to, it's certainly near enough to zoom in. So,
Yeah. Great. So my last question is another leading question, but you're very adroit at understanding where I'm going. Um, but in public discourse, there's also lots of talk about the crisis of the humanities, the diminution of the humanities.
or
And so my leading question is, um, how can we revive a sense of the humanities' importance in education, in our lives, in our schools, workplace, right? So
yeah.
what is your experience? What are your practice? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to deny that there are some realities happening with universities and colleges, and that
Mhm.
there's certainly decisions that are being made that seem to be devaluing the humanities and what they have to offer, particularly to for a workforce to economic stability. Um, I will say that from my perspective, working with the humanities councils every day, that the humanities themselves are truly thriving.
Mhm.
And we certainly see, for book festivals or book tours, people are in line for hours to wait to meet their favorite author. Um, there's a great hunger, I think,
Mm.
to feel that kind of engagement and connection that we've been talking about.
Mhm.
I see waiting lists for public humanities programs and people out the door and people really, really hungry for this kind of engagement. Um, and I'm community members, so I'm talking about outside of the classroom.
Right.
That said, we certainly, every humanities council works with scholars, people who have a great deal of knowledge in particular fields or backgrounds, who have studied and learned and written books. And that research can be very empowering in a lot of
Hmm.
ways for community members. And community members themselves, of course, also bring that knowledge as well through lived experience or research that they have done. We see fields like genealogy. I mean, people
Hmm.
want to know their history. So I see the humanities thriving, and I think that perhaps what's needed is sort of a connection between the work that is being generated through academic research and seeing the connection. So, so many teachers and professors are so excellent at coming into public spaces and engaging in communities and sharing their knowledge. And I think the extent to which we can have that be an exchange of knowledge will, I think, not just one way delivering, but really an exchange between communities, between people. I think that strengthens our humanities infrastructure. So, I mean, I think it's about how we describe the work and um, how we explore it together. I mean, I do
Yes.
think there are
Yes.
there are barriers to
Right.
participation
Yes.
that certainly need to be lowered.
Right.
And I think humanities councils are continue to do a lot of really wonderful work in that area.
Yes. So, in hearing your reflections on this question, the word that comes to mind, it's an overused word, but in this context, I think it's an important one, is outreach.
Mm,
And to be outward, or also the phrase is being outward facing. So for teachers and scholars there who may feel the struggle of getting students engaged with the humanities. So one area is to look to state humanities councils, see what people are already doing
mm-hmm,
in the community, see how you can become engaged with your projects, can have a more public face to them,
mm-hmm.
and gain, as you said, gain that sort of insight and energy from people who are interested in what you're doing, and you can become then fertilized or gain,
Yeah.
gain some new perspectives from what they're saying. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think
ask.
sometimes I do know what you're saying, but I'm thinking about, this idea of outreach still centers knowledge maybe in the academy, right? So it's
Yes,
like
yeah,
the
no, I didn't
knowledge
mean
is,
to foreground
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
and then that outreach. I mean, I think there's so many steps before the outreach in terms of trust and working
Yes.
on right relations and
Yes.
frankly history, right? Like, well,
Yes.
what are those histories? And I think um there are institutions that are looking at historically what have their relationships been in
Yes.
community and
Yes.
how can that change, and so it's not extractive, right, which is
Right.
all those things we want to be thinking about as we engage. Yeah,
Oh, it's all
absolutely.
humanities work, right? It's all
Hmm.
good humanities work. Well, thank you, Phoebe, for your thoughts, your insights, your
Thank
time
you.
today with us at Humanities Watch, with me at Humanities Watch, and I look forward to more conversations in the future. And we'll be in touch. And so, thank you again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks.